Welcome to the summit of Independence Pass, a mountain-top highway accessible only in the summer and early fall. Up here in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, the weather is unpredictable. The terrain can be treacherous, but the views are gorgeous. It was here in June of 1970, just 2 miles from the top, that a dead man was found, half buried by a rockfall. In the years since he was discovered, investigators have attempted to identify the dead man, now known as Independence Pass John Doe. They have spent countless hours trying to locate his family and give his story the conclusion it deserves. 50 years to the day, another body was found in the Colorado Rockies. He was just 50 miles east of here, in the Lost Creek Wilderness, and also without any personal identification. Both John Does faced incredible challenges in their recoveries and attempts at their identification. However, just last month, in June of 2022, Lost Creek Wilderness John Doe gained back his name. It is a success story for Park County investigators, forensic genealogists, and the friends and family that spent years searching for their loved one. Maybe with amazing tools like genetic genealogy and hard-working investigators like these, it's a success story that can be replicated for others, still unidentified, in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. On June 19, 1970, 2 men hiking over Independence Pass in Lake County, Colorado, discovered decomposed remains in a ditch alongside the north side of this road, 2 miles east of the summit. The deceased man's torso was covered by rockfall, and he was missing his left arm. Because the man's sleeve was also rolled up, Lake County Sheriff's investigators called to the scene wondered if the man's arm had been previously amputated. His cause of death was recorded as unknown, though based on his surroundings, there was speculation that he may have been sitting at the roadside when rocks fell from above, trapping him where he rested. Shockingly, a picture of the dead man, as he was found, was actually published in the local paper. It's a little graphic, so out of respect for the deceased and for you, I'm not including it in this video, but I will put a link in the description for those of you who are curious. The man's body was additionally described by the paper as being almost completely decomposed, and authorities estimated the date of his death as being sometime in late 1969 or 1970. According to the newspaper report, he was wearing a pair of light gray pants, a tattered sweatshirt, and tennis or hiking shoes with socks over the outside of them. And this may have been to combat slick or icy conditions near the summit. According to the sheriff's report, he had $7 and a razor in his pocket. As the sheriff's department freed the man's remains from the rockfall, they discovered that part of his rib cage was also missing. And this caused them to consider the possibility that perhaps part of his body and his arm had actually been removed by a snowplow. The next day, 8 members of the sheriff's department searched the roadside areas surrounding where the body had been found, looking for more of the man or clues he had left, but turned up no other evidence. An autopsy by the Lake County coroner confirmed that the loss of the man's left arm was post-mortem, or occurring after death. The John Doe was a white male, weighing 120 to 150 pounds. He had been between 5'6" and 5'8" inches tall, and between 18 and 30 years in age. He had dark hair, and his skin had no distinguishing marks or features. His teeth were in quite good shape, and detectives hoped that with several gold and platinum fillings that his dental work would lead them to a match. The Doe's teeth were reviewed by an odontologist, and a copy of his dentals was recorded for comparisons. While investigators were unable to retrieve fingerprints from the man's one hand, the sheriff's office sent John Doe's dental charts on to the FBI. Several missing men from the area were considered for the John Doe's identity. A Minneapolis doctor named James Carey had recently disappeared on a skiing trip to nearby Aspen, but he was ruled out for being too tall and likely to have more money or identification on his person. Dr. Carey's body was subsequently found a few weeks later. When no match to a missing person could be made, the John Doe was buried in Evergreen Cemetery. And at the time of his burial, investigators guessed that the man had been dead closer to just a month at the time of his discovery, so the grave marker listed May 1970 as his date of death. On July 15th, almost 4 weeks after the doe's body was found, a state highway maintenance man discovered more remains. Located below the road on the switchback near to where John Doe had been, was the missing portion of his body. The Herald-Democrat reported that it may have been subject to animal activity. The man's shoulder and arm were only bone. However, the hand and wrist still had flesh attached, so they were sent on to the FBI, with hopes that fingerprints could be retrieved. Unfortunately, no matches and no successful leads surfaced in John Doe's case. Years passed as his unidentified body remained below the grave marker at the Evergreen Cemetery. The case grew cold, and slowly the cemetery became overgrown, a victim of neglect and the ever-growing underbrush. You would drive by, and you couldn't even see there was a cemetery here, John Pearson told the Vale Daily. Mr. Pearson was a local volunteer who, in 2004, took on the task of cleaning up the cemetery. As John tended to the grounds, he noticed the grave marker of Independence Pass John Doe. For several years, John took care of the cemetery, working with other volunteers to clean and maintain the grounds. As time passed, John Pearson's curiosity about the grave marker and the unknown man buried below it grew. In 2011, he reached out to Audrey Simpkins, a cold case analyst with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Audrey then went to Leadville to meet with Lake County Sheriff Rod Fenske. There, she learned that the case files for John Doe had been lost. With the sheriff's permission, Audrey Simpkins and crime author Sylvia Pettum searched the Lake County Sheriff's Department records room in Leadville from top to bottom, but they were unable to find any record of the John Doe found at Independence Pass. Undeterred, Sylvia and Audrey turned next to Lake County Coroner Shannon Kent. For more than 40 years, the unidentified man had been below the marker at the unnamed grave in Evergreen Cemetery, and in 2013, thanks to the dedication and relentless curiosity of John Pearson, Audrey Simpkins, and Sylvia Pettum, he was exhumed for DNA testing. So many tools were available to law enforcement now that weren't possible back in 1970 when the man had been found. Digging up the grave to re-examine the cadaver could bring in a lead with real answers. Coroner Kent found that while the remains were mostly skeletal, the embalming process performed in 1970 had preserved some of the flesh. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation was able to retrieve a fingerprint from a single index finger. Next, Coroner Kent sent the doe's femur to the University of North Texas. At the time, nearly all of Colorado's unidentified remains were sent there for genetic testing. Members of the public and law enforcement could request advanced DNA testing and submit citizens' samples for comparison. At the University of North Texas, mitochondrial DNA was extracted from the femur. DNA of this type allows for tracing through a person's mother's genetic line. But advancements in DNA technology were being made regularly, and investigators were confident that they could do better than that. In order to get a complete DNA profile for Independence Pass John Doe, Coroner Kent next sent the doe's skull to the University of North Texas. DNA extraction from the skull was a success, and now investigators have a complete DNA profile, enough DNA to match to any possible relatives. With their genetic findings, detectives were able to rule out several missing men as not being the Independence Pass John Doe. An escaped prisoner from Nebraska named William Arnold had been considered a possible match. As a 16-year-old, William had murdered both of his parents over a disagreement regarding use of the family car. After serving less than 8 years for his crimes, William broke out of prison and escaped with the help of his reverend, who gave him some money and a ride to the bus station. He seemed like a good match for Independence Pass John Doe, but William Arnold was excluded via DNA. An AWOL soldier from Fort Carson, nearby, was also ruled out after comparing DNA from the skull sample to the missing man's brother in New Jersey. Finally, Gary Cantlin, a 26-year-old from Riverdale, Illinois, was also ruled out. He had boarded a bus to Florida to see his son in 1969 and never arrived. No one knows where he is today. None of the missing men were Independence Pass John Doe. Prior to his reburial, John Doe's skull was analyzed to create a facial reconstruction. These images of what the doe may have looked like were created and released thanks to those efforts. Audrey Simpkins, Colorado Bureau of Investigation analyst, who has spent years on the Independence Pass John Doe case, said of cold cases like these, "If it was easy, they'd all be solved." But she also said of these cases, "It's important to continue to work them, to never give up on them, and to never forget." Any leads or information regarding the Independence Pass John Doe should go to the Lake County Sheriff's Office. Exactly 50 years, and approximately 50 miles from where we started, at the Independence Pass summit, another body was found in a remote area of the Colorado Rockies. It was June 19, 2020, in the Lost Creek Wilderness. A group of teens hiking stumbled across scattered skeletal remains off of the trail. The teenagers had no cell service at this location, so they hiked to a Park County Sheriff's substation to report their find. The teens were interviewed that day about what they had seen, and the next day, at 6 a.m., they led a 17-person team of investigators back to the remote location where they had found the John Doe. This team consisted of members from Park County Sheriff's Office, Park County Coroner's Office, local search and rescue, a forensic canine unit, and several anthropologists. Together, they hiked more than 5 miles from the Twin Eagles campground to recover the body and examine the location for available clues. The remains were scattered over an area of more than 150 yards. The terrain was steep and rocky. It was a difficult task that was made even more challenging by an impending storm that threatened the safety of recovery workers. But by utilizing a grid search and well-trained cadaver dogs, nearly all of the John Doe's remains were found. The deceased had been found wearing size 10.5 shoes, socks, a gray hoodie, size 40 shorts, and this Atlanta Braves hat. Additionally recovered were his backpack, hiking poles, a Star of Life knife, a Samsung phone, and a shotgun. Inside the backpack were a number of water bottles and toiletries, but no personal identification could be found. The unidentified man was determined to be between 25 and 50 years in age, and between 5'5" and 6'1" tall. It was estimated that he had been dead for about a year. Unfortunately, due to the state of the remains, neither fingerprints or dental records would be available tools for detectives looking to identify the dead man. Additionally, no matches to any locally reported missing persons could be made. A sample of the remains was sent for DNA analysis and entry into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. Available details for the John Doe and his effects were entered into NamUs, an online database of the missing and unidentified, and Park County Coroner David Kintz reached out to the media in hopes of turning up leads. 14 different leads were generated and investigated thanks to the local media coverage. However, none resulted in the Doe's identification. One promising lead came out of the online database. Someone believed that they recognized some of the dead man's things. Investigators hoped to make a positive identification by comparing the Doe's DNA to a known relative. So, Park County Coroner Kintz sent out remains for DNA extraction to a private lab, Bodie Technology in Virginia. Unfortunately, the DNA was not a match. Next, the extraction from Bodie was sent to United Data Connect. United Data Connect is a Denver-based software and computing company that uses investigative genetic genealogy to solve crimes. They used the extract to complete a whole genome sequence for the unidentified man, and then used genetic genealogy to find a positive ID for the previously unidentified John Doe. The co-founder of United Data Connect, Mitch Morrissey, explains the process as it relates to the Lost Creek Wilderness John Doe best.
What we do is take the same DNA extract and we sequence it. We were lucky enough in this case to get a whole genome sequence, which is an awful lot of data from the individual. We took that data, we uploaded it in the database Family Tree DNA, and we started to get leads, genetic leads from Family Tree DNA. And basically, we got some what they call good hits there. And we went back and we searched back on those hits looking for the most recent common ancestor. In this case, the most recent common ancestor was a great-great-grandfather who had a number of children. We then started down the family tree, contacting people, talking to people, excluding lines of those trees. It's an awful lot of work to do this genealogy, but obviously when you get answers like we have today, it's important work.
The John Doe's DNA, extracted from his skeletal remains, led genetic analysts to his great-great-grandfather, John W. Morris. Following the family tree, genetic investigators ruled out descendants until they found a family with a missing person. Quickly, a match to a genetic sibling was made, and now they could give the Lost Creek Wilderness John Doe back his name. A press conference to announce the identification was held Monday, June 13th, 2022.
And that we were able to conclude and determine an identification linking this individual directly to a family member. And we are able to identify this decedent today as Gregory Allan Woodford.
Gregory Allan Woodford was a 30-year-old from Roanoke, Virginia, who had spent his final few years in Colorado Springs. He had been a respected Navy veteran. Interviews with friends and family determined that Mr. Woodford went missing and died in early June of 2019. While his family did not attend the press conference, his mother did release a statement. Greg, who was also named Mario when he served in the Navy, was an extraordinary son and human being. He was such an intelligent, caring, kind, generous, selfless man. Greg was drawn to Colorado due to its exquisite beauty and his inherent love for nature and animals, especially dogs, and his deep passion for the wolf sanctuary. Greg was dearly loved by many people whose lives he touched, and he will be forever missed. Words cannot sufficiently express my gratitude and appreciation, especially to Dave the coroner, and also to the genealogist and everyone involved in all the time and effort and resources used to identify my son. You have my deepest, heartfelt thanks for not giving up. Thank you so much.
That short note from the family kind of emphasizes why we do this. It is a passion of mine to tell the story of decedents and make sure that their family knows where they are, and the family can work on closure.
The success of United Data Connect and the Park County Coroner's Office gives hope to the hundreds of other missing and unidentified in Colorado and beyond. Perhaps one day, Independence Pass John Doe will have his name back too. His family will know where he is and can work on closure.